Well, more lies from General Starmer. But is there a reasonable excuse? Welcome to Grey Matters. Hello and welcome to Grey Matters, the channel that promotes the fact that the older generation still matters and which looks at issues that matter to the older generation. Now, in the run-up to the general election, Starmer repeatedly made this promise. Let's take a look.
I'm determined to put money back in the pockets of working people. And that's why a Labour government would freeze council tax this year. No ifs, no buts. With a Labour government, you could rip up that council tax bill because you would not pay a penny more than you paid last year. And we need to be clear about council tax. Labour would freeze council tax next year using that windfall tax that hasn't been collected. Yes, you heard it right. Not a penny more on your council tax, not a penny more than the bill you paid last year. And that is a tax cut for the 99% of working people. Now,
Rayner has given the green light to councils to increase their community charges by as much as 15%. Now, at first glance, this appears to be another broken promise and a move that will affect every household in the UK and hit low-income families and the elderly harder than anyone else. But is it true? Will it affect everyone, or could there be justification for it? GB News took up the cudgel and reported on it with a response from Jonathan Porters, the economics professor at King's College. Let's take a look at that.
Moving on, the Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner has given permission for 6 councils so far to increase their council taxes, which is going to affect millions of households.
From April, people will see up to a 10% hike in their bills.
Well, let's talk to the economics professor at King's College, Jonathan Porters. Jonathan, morning to you. This is a change because before the election, if a local council wanted to raise the council tax by more than 4.99%, 5% effectively, there had to be a local referendum. This has changed now. The Deputy Prime Minister, as effectively the local government secretary, can decide, and she's given the green light to 6 councils so far, the highest increase being 10%. 10% is nearly 4 times the current rate of inflation. How are households going to pay it, and is the principle right that the Secretary of State should decide?
Well, of course, it's the local councils ultimately that decide. She's just saying they don't have to put it to a referendum. But the point is that for these councils, effectively, if they don't put up their tax by more than 5%, they're going to go bust. So this is not because they're overspending now relative to what the government thinks they should be spending. It's because they have these accumulated deficits and liabilities, which is a combination of cuts over many years. Of course, George Osborne cut grants to local authorities by, between 40 and 75% over a number of years. So a lot of councils have piled up deficits over the last few years. And for some, those deficits have come to the point of directly threatening their financial viability.
So he's saying that after years of cuts, some councils are in real financial difficulty and need help to continue providing the services that they must provide. Now, that help, it seems, is to put up the cost to the local people receiving those services. However, I don't know which councils are involved, nor which political parties control them. But as a university lecturer, I think it's highly likely that he's a supporter of the government and might be putting a party spin on his comments. Again, I don't know. And sure, it's only half a dozen councils today, but the precedent has now been set. And what worries me, and what should worry you, is how long it will be before Rayner allows every council to impose inflation-busting rises. Now, we've already commented on this channel that the government is throwing billions of pounds around like confetti on its pet projects, such as net zero, or to countries that don't need it, like China for their climate projects or India for art installations. So, Mr. Starmer, instead of hitting everyone with yet another tax hike, Why not use some of the money you've got sloshing around in the Westminster swamp and keep your repeated promise to freeze community charges this year? There's an idea. Now, in other news, General Starmer has just announced he intends to abolish NHS England. Let's take a look at this clip from the Mirror.
I don't see why decisions about £200 billion of taxpayer money on something as fundamental to our security as the NHS should be taken by an arm's length body, NHS England. And I can't, in all honesty, explain to the British people why they should spend their money on 2 layers of bureaucracy. That money could and should be spent on nurses, doctors, operation, GP appointments. So today I can announce I'm bringing management of the NHS back into democratic control by abolishing the arm's length body NHS England. That will put the NHS back at the heart of government where it belongs, freeing it to focus on patients, less bureaucracy, with more money for nurses, an NHS refocused on cutting waiting times at your hospital.
Now, in my view, this is potentially an excellent idea. NHS England is too big and bloated, and it is a huge blocker. It blocks new GP surgeries being built for a start. I liken it to a school with its board of governors, and the school wants to spend its budget on books, but the governors don't want to allow it, or won't allow it. Similarly, the NHS knows where the money needs to be spent, but the NHS England will block it. Now, NHS England was formed in 2013, specifically to make it independent from the government. The problem is that it's grown into such a massive, untouchable behemoth that in so many ways is making life so much harder for people needing NHS treatment. NHS England is responsible for providing national leadership for the NHS. It's actually the world's largest quango. It was set up to deliver high quality care, support staff, and ensure value for money. And I think we'd probably all agree it's failing on all fronts. If it were up to the brilliant but overstretched staff, high quality care would be the norm, and patients, mainly the elderly, wouldn't be treated in corridors or pushed into alcoves and forgotten. It certainly doesn't appear to be supporting staff when nurses are being victimised for refusing to share female-only spaces with fully intact biological males. And the value for money, I think, just translates into cost-cutting, and that puts lives at risk. For example, if there's a medication that will cure you, or a cheap alternative that probably won't, guess which one you'll get? The only area I think we've seen real change and improvement is in cancer care. Now, NHS England's responsibilities have expanded over the years, and it's now a single regulatory body responsible for overseeing funding, planning, delivery and performance of NHS healthcare in England. And quite simply, it now means it's failing on even more fronts. Abolishing it would essentially put control back in the hands of the government. Starmer claims that abolishing it would end the duplication from 2 organisations doing the same job, the NHS and NHS England. And that would free up staff to focus on patients and put more resources onto the front line. However, here are my concerns. Firstly, it all sounds well and good, unless once it's back in government hands, they will seek to impose a range of fees that we'll have to pay for certain treatments and consultations. Now, that's something that's been commented on at the moment on social media. But the ridicule that the government launched at Reform for suggesting the same thing, having actually misinterpreted what Farage meant, I doubt they'd seriously put that forward as a concept. Secondly, bearing in mind that NHS England was set up to make it independent of government control, is this really a move to give the government even more control over our lives, literally, when it comes to health? Is it a step towards hard left or communistic control over the country? And thirdly, the NHS is said to be the largest employer in Europe. Staff can be directly employed by the NHS, employed by a service provider, self-employed, or provide services under a contract, often through another third-party non-NHS contractor. NHS England employs around 15,300 staff, and while Starmer is forever bleating on about looking after the working people, if this plan comes to fruition, we could see thousands of redundancies across the country and the closures of companies who, maybe with all their eggs in one basket, rely on the NHS for their business. Sadly, you can't deflate a huge monolith like NHS England without increasing unemployment and causing hardship. And that's a double-edged sword I would not want to wield. So what do you think? Do let us know your thoughts in the comments on both today's topics. We have a very lively bunch in our growing community, so do feel free to join in the conversations. Some exciting news coming up soon. We'll put a video out about that soon. If you enjoy our content, do give us a thumbs up, subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay in touch with our future videos. In the meantime, thanks for joining us, and until the next time on Grey Matters, it's bye for now.